Hello and welcome to Your True North, a space filled with authentic talks about personal stories, a space where you can connect, explore, and let yourself be in awe of the human spirit. I am Yulia Farkas, and I am your guide along this journey of discovering conventional, inspirational, motivational, witty, or even surprising personal stories. Do you happen to briefly meet people and wonder what their actual story is? But people don't come with subtitles now, do they? So what do you do then? You let yourself be curious and open, and you initiate a conversation. And maybe, just maybe, you are lucky enough to discover an interesting story of reinvention after a long career in what seems to be an unrelated industry. But he eventually found his mojo, and I'm delighted that he is here today to tell us how that happened. So please welcome Andrew Thorp.
Well, thank you, Yulia. It's a privilege to be with you on this recording. So I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you for joining me. So Andrew, speaker, writer, trainer, and consultant in the field of storytelling, business storytelling, that is. Please share a little. I have some inside information already, but our listeners do not. So I know that your family had an interesting influence on you over the years, from traveling to studying and to even picking a profession. And I'm very curious to know, what do family, golf, and public speaking have in common?
Oh, how to weave all those things together. That's a good question, Yulia. Well, when I was young, my father, when he was alive, he was an accountant and he had various jobs in different parts of the world. So I traveled quite a bit so I was one of the best traveled youngsters in my primary school, in my elementary school, because we lived in Canada for a while. We lived in America for a while. I went to school in America, in Illinois. So there was an influence there from the family in terms of travel. But there was also an influence from my brother. So he's my only sibling. He's 10 years older than me, and he is a professional golfer. So I actually grew up, when we moved back from the States, I settled in a part of England called Lytham St. Anne's. It's in the northwest of England, right on the coast, and it's very well known for golf. It's where they play the Open Golf Championship. And when you have a brother who's a pro, and you live in a kind of a golfing center like Lytham St. Anne's, then it's inevitable that you're going to learn how to play. So golf was my life from the age of maybe 11. That's all I basically did apart from studying at school. I played golf at every opportunity, and I got to quite a good level as an amateur, and thought about following in his footsteps. But I didn't feel I was really good enough. You need to be very, very good to earn a living as a player. And I was more academically inclined than my brother was. So I went down a different path. I went to Manchester University in the northwest of England, and did a social sciences degree. But I kept the golf going and captained the university team. I played for England and Britain at university level. But my first job out of university with a social science degree, history, politics, and sociology, had nothing to do with history, politics, or sociology. I moved straight back into the golf industry. So I kind of reverted to what was familiar. So I ended up working in the golf industry for 22 years in a variety of roles. So that was, I'll stop at that point, but that was the familial influence, both in terms of travel, but also in terms of lifestyle and profession.
So your brother played an important role in your decision to basically pick a field in which you wanted to develop yourself.
Yeah.
And somehow you learned to love it. But it wasn't quite enough for you, was it? The golf industry, the golf field.
I think when you and I spoke before, in the sort of the preparation for this recording, I was talking to you about the challenge that I think we all have to discover who we really are and what we're destined to do in life, what we were put on the earth to do. And when I was younger, I was quite good at sport, particularly golf, but some other sports as well. I was also quite arty. I considered a career as or studying in graphic design because I was quite a good artist. So you have sport on the one side, you have art on the other side, and they don't seem to go very well together, because sometimes I felt a little bit out of place amongst all the true, pure artists. I felt a little bit out of place amongst the sporty people who can only ever talk about sport. That's all they ever talk about. So I felt like a bit of an outsider in both those extremes. So for me, it was a continual search for, what I really enjoyed and what I felt I was destined to do. So in the golf industry, I did a variety of roles. I was a journalist for a couple of years because I love writing. I used to run commercial golf and leisure clubs in kind of interim turnaround roles where they were bought by new owners and it needed to be sort of shaken up a little bit and made more profitable. I used to teach golf for a living. I wasn't good enough to play for a living, but I was good enough to teach for a living. And I taught business people to play who were beginners. They didn't actually play to begin with, but they were interested in learning because they felt that golf was good for business and networking, so that they felt they were missing out. So I had a number of roles in the golf industry, but again, none of them really fed my soul. They didn't feel just right in terms of who I was. And it was really a life-changing experience that sent me on a different path to what I do now, which was a business partnership that kind of went wrong, and a number of things probably in my mid-40s went wrong in my life. I got divorced. I had no stable home for a while. My mother nearly died. And this business partnership was problematic. So it was one of those classic sort of crises that come along in life where you're at a crossroads and you have to decide, which direction you're now going to go. So you want to move away from the pain. And I associated the golf industry with pain. It's probably a little bit unfair on golf because, it did bring me some joy in those 22 years, but because of the business situation, I obviously wanted to move away from that and towards what I loved doing. And if you like,
sorry to interrupt you, but to bring you where I wanted to ask you something. What do you do when everything that can go wrong actually does go wrong at the same time? What did you need to find in yourself in order to pick up the pieces? How important was surrounding yourself with the appropriate people and letting go of others while you were making the choice?
It was. Yeah, it's a very good question, Yulia. It's and I think back to that time, it was a very unsettled time. There were moments when I was very unhappy. I was losing some confidence because I wasn't really earning any money, and I was in debt, and it was very difficult at that time. But you're right, it depends who you surround yourself with. You've got to find people who will help you out of that hole and give you the confidence to get going again. And obviously that you use the word mojo in your introduction. I'd lost my mojo a little bit. And I think you find it when you find the thing that you love doing, that you're destined to do. But there was one moment, because I like focusing on a moment. I mean, you talk about this, and Stefano talks about this, our mutual friend, focus on a moment in time. And while I was in this transitionary period, I was being coached by a sales trainer by the splendid name of Johnny Apples. Isn't that a great name?
Yeah, it is. It is.
And he actually changed his name by deed poll to be more remarkable. He called himself Johnny Apples to stand out and be remarkable. And he's an amazing guy. He was very positive. He had full of energy, lots of possibility. And he used to do these coaching sessions in the Lowry Hotel in Manchester, in the cafe bar. So when I was being mentored by him, we would sit in the cafe bar. And this was when I was still teaching golf just to earn a small amount of money. You know, I wanted to move away from that, but I was still doing that just to sort of earn some money. And he looked at me and he said, Andrew, you're like a champion jockey on a donkey. And I thought that was such a great phrase. you're like a champion jockey on a donkey. So I guess what he meant by that was that I had some talents that weren't really being utilized in my golf role. And that was the donkey, which is not I don't want to discount golf teachers, because they do important work, and I was a mediocre teacher at best. And some of them are very, very good and do great work, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't really where I should have been. So he was very influential in moving me in a different direction. But I had to figure out, what it was and how I was going to earn a living in a new role.
Yes, and still, okay, people that are next to you in those moments of, uncertainty, of unclarity, I don't know how to name them. Still, they have their purpose, they have their role, but you need to do the work, because unless you work with yourself, nothing happens. I mean, they can be there for you, they can try to, pick you up and maybe try to change the way that you look at things, but you need to be the one that actually does the work. So
nothing will change unless you take action. You're right. Yeah. And I've never been one to be, sitting on my hands waiting for things to happen. I'm very proactive. But the problem that I had, I think, was that which direction to channel my energies. Because if you're in the wrong profession, then you can work very, very hard and not really find your mojo or find your destiny. So the challenge was not necessarily acting, it was what path to take so that I could channel my energies in the most productive way, in the right way.
Yeah, where to direct that action. And yes. How did you make the choice? How did you end up making the choice?
Well, if you like public speaking and you work in the golf industry, you get lots of opportunity because no one else wants to do it. And everybody very happily lets you go to the front of the queue and say, oh yes, Andrew will do the speech or whatever. So there are lots of prize giving ceremonies and so forth in the golf industry. So I love doing it. I've always loved working with an audience and being on a stage. I know most people hate it. They'll run a mile, but for some strange reason, I like doing that. So I knew I wanted to do something which involved speaking and hopefully, connecting with people and connecting with an audience. But I needed to find what to speak about. You've got to find your message. You've got to find your angle. And you mentioned before about, were there particular people that influenced you? Well, Johnny Apples was one of them. But another one was a guy called Robert Buckley. Now, I don't know whether he's in your network yet, Yulia, but I will introduce you because he's quite an amazing guy. He's about 15 years younger than me because I'm ancient now. And I met Bob at a queue into a business exhibition in Manchester a few years before my difficult time. And he's very positive, is Bob. He's one of these people, a bit like Johnny Apples. He's all very up, he's very positive. And he just rang me out of the blue in his very cheery, breezy way. And he said, oh, hi, Andy. I'm in Manchester. How's things? I said, well, they're not good. you know, because he didn't know what had happened to me. So he said, well, what's wrong? And we arranged to meet in Manchester in a bar on Deansgate in the middle of Manchester. And I said that I was about to be thrown out of my apartment because I was living in a rented apartment, but the owner of the apartment hadn't paid the mortgage on it and it was being repossessed. So I was informed that I'd have to leave. And he said, well, I've got a room in my house. Do you want to come and stay with me for a while until things settle down? So I gratefully accepted. And what I didn't know, Yulia, is that Bob is really into personal development. He's got this massive collection of business and self-help books. It's like a bookshop in his lounge. So in the few months that I stayed with Bob, I started reading some of this stuff. And I'd never heard of TED Talks before. He introduced me to TED Talks. I thought that was fantastic. And I resolved that I would speak at the main TED conference by the time I was 50. That was one of my ambitions. And I started reading some of this stuff. And I thought, well, I really like some of this stuff because, I mean, not all of it will, you know, resonate with you. You can't follow every piece of advice and read every book. But I read some of them. And I thought, well, I'll try some of this on me. You know, some of the advice they're giving in the book. Let's see if it works. I'll you know, so a lot of it was people like Seth Godin, who's a marketing guru based in the States. He's very big on building a following around an idea that you have. You know, you build a tribe, people who will get behind something that you're trying to achieve. So I suppose for me, the goal was to find a role for me, a job, a profession, which was me, that would help me find my mojo. And people obviously were quite aligned with helping me get there. So I began to build a sort of a network of advocates who were helping me find my voice as a speaker and as a writer, because I started blogging a lot. And I started to get some, you know, work coming through. It was very slow at first, but it started to come through. So that was a turning point for me, that phone call from Bob.
Going back to this part about personal development and reading about it and, you know, researching this, let's say, this area, this domain. After facing this turning point in your life, what did you learn to unlearn about yourself? What habits, beliefs you unlearned, you needed to unlearn in order to find your voice, find yourself, and go, you know, towards or go in the direction that you wanted to be in?
Yeah. To be honest, Yulia, going in this direction, you know, the direction I've ended up, felt very natural. So in a way, what I had to unlearn was to detach myself from the golf industry, to let go of everything that was familiar to me for the last 22 years. And then the previous 10 years learning to play. I had to let go of that and have the courage to go down this new path. But because things weren't going very well initially, because it's very hard to earn a living straight away in a new direction, I was under quite a lot of pressure to get a job. And I remember applying for some jobs, and I found it the most depressing experience to apply for jobs and get either no response or rejections, because I thought, well, I'm better than this. You know, I can't be struggling like this because I've got some talent. I know I can achieve something. So in a way, I kept being pushed towards where I ended up going, which is what I do now. So I had to let go of the past, in other words, to be stuck to the past of the wrong profession and the probably the pressure to get a job. I had to resist that and find my voice by doing something that I felt, you know, came quite easily to me.
Um, we live in a world where we mostly tend to focus on the outside. You know, how we are perceived by others, how we are complimented by the way that we dress. If we have a job, you know, that is interesting to other people, if we work in a certain industry that is, I don't know, envied by some people, if our possessions, if we are envied by others because of our possessions, basically what tends to matter is the image we project on the outside. And many times we forget to that we need to take care of our inside first, because this is where it all comes from. And you work a lot with people. When you started on this new journey, you started to work a lot with people, and you needed to project a certain image about yourself on the outside. But how do you tend to your inner garden in order to project a nice, a good image on the outside?
Gosh, you asked very interesting questions, Yulia. Very thoughtful questions, which require a thoughtful answer. One of the things that's difficult when you reinvent yourself and you're not really earning any money and you're trying to position yourself as a professional in the professional marketplace is you've got to appear strong. And, you know, if you have an old car, you know, you don't want to park it in the car park. You park it around the corner and you walk to the client's premises in case they see you pull up in a lousy old banger of a car. So there was a slight mismatch between my circumstances and the professional image that I wanted to project to that audience. But the thing that felt right was that the work and the focus for me, my why in Simon Sinek's terms, I had found it. There was no doubt in my mind that I could do this. I was good at this. It came easily. I loved it. And so all that was missing was people to pay me money to keep going. So if you're in the position of loving what you're doing but not earning any money for a while, then the pressure builds up. But fortunately, work did start to come in. But I know it's a very roundabout answer, this, and it's also to do with finding your mojo, because I think, and I actually called the company when I created the company with my then business partner, Sarah. This was about 11, 12 years ago now. We called it Mojo Life because we had both found our mojo by changing direction. She had a career change as well and started down this path of personal development and storytelling and value-based, you know, heart-based leadership and that kind of thing. So we both felt really comfortable doing this. It just felt right. And you find your mojo because your mojo comes from inside you. You know, when you feel grounded in what you're doing, you feel it's in your DNA, it's in your blood to do this, then that projects outwardly in confidence. And then people sense the confidence that you have. It's like a vibe that you put out, and they are comforted by the fact that they're going to be in safe hands with you, because this person clearly knows what he's doing and is, you know, has the confidence. But it starts from the inside. It always starts from the inside.
And how can you work to, you know, to make yourself stronger, to trust yourself more? I mean, at the beginning, you probably, before, you know, figuring out that this is the journey meant for you, probably you had times when you were confused, when you weren't sure about this, when you didn't have enough confidence in yourself to do this. So how do you make yourself stronger in this respect?
Again, fantastic question. Gosh, you make me think really hard. I think that when you are reinventing yourself and aiming at a professional marketplace, it's easy to feel comfortable as a big fish in a small pond. In other words, you go after small businesses who clearly are in no better situation than you are, you know, as an established, successful business. And you feel a little bit less like an imposter when you're focusing on very, very small businesses. But the trouble with that is that they're never really going to make you enough money for you to succeed. You need to aim for a bigger pond and bigger clients. But it's difficult to find the confidence sometimes to think, well, I belong in that situation. You know, I can walk into PricewaterhouseCoopers or, you know, Swiss Re or whatever, you know, big, huge multinational organizations, and I deserve to be there. You know, I can hold my own. I'm good enough to be here. I didn't think that to begin with. You know, I thought, well, I'll aim at little tiny businesses, and, you know, we can speak on level terms and I won't feel too intimidated. But again, we come back to people making a difference. I have a lovely friend called David Cotton, who's become my mentor, not in an official sense, but in an unofficial sense. And he's in his 60s. He's an internationally renowned trainer and consultant and writer and musician. He's one of these annoyingly talented people. And I always have to remind myself that I'm better at golf than he is. At least I can beat him at golf.
Have an upper hand somewhere.
And David actually asked me, well, I'd given David one or two tiny little opportunities in the past, and, you know, I don't think anybody owes me for that, but he gave me an opportunity a few years ago. He said, Andrew, I've been asked to do a piece of work by a big sort of international organization. They're based in Switzerland. And I didn't work anywhere outside Manchester, you know. So and he said they want someone to help them with storytelling. And I know this is your thing. So would you like to do this? Do you fancy doing this job? So, of course, I thought for half a second and said, yes. I said, yes, I'll do it. And I had to be interviewed. I think I was up against a Canadian company and an American company. I had to be interviewed. And I got the job. I got the work. And I had to go to Zurich to give a talk to 60 of their corporate executives. And something very funny happened. I don't know whether I've told you this story before, but obviously the listeners won't know this story. But when I'd finished that talk, it was about an hour long, you know, a bit of Q&A at the end. And so I'm under a lot of pressure because David, the man with this huge international reputation, has recommended me. So I've got to do a good job. I don't want to mess it up. So the boss of this organization came up to me at the end of my 60-minute talk. And he said, that was very good, Andrew. Well done. So sort of relaxed. And I hadn't mentioned, you know, the why thing, the Simon Sinek thing in my talk, because it's influenced my thinking, you know, finding your why, starting with your why. And he said, oh, I really like the reference you made to the start with why, because we really like that here in our company. And I said, well, yeah, it's influenced me. That's why I mentioned it. And then he said something very funny to me. He said, we asked Simon Sinek to give this talk, but he was too expensive.
Okay.
So I thought, how am I going to process that comment? And I took it as a huge compliment, you know, because Simon Sinek is one of these people who I really admire. He's right at the top end of the thought leadership circle of speakers and experts. So I didn't mind being mentioned in the same breath as the great Simon Sinek. So obviously I'm the cheap version. If you can't afford him, then you can try me.
Well, lucky
So
you.
that one talk in Switzerland led to 17 workshops for that company, in New York, in Chicago, in Kansas City, in London, Munich, and Zurich. From one email from that man. So that was a turning point, because it made me realize that I could work at that level of organization. So that was a big step up for me, because I didn't really believe that I belonged there. I was probably a bit frightened to approach a big organization like that. And I don't mix in those circles normally anyway. But David introduced me, gave me a step up, basically, a big step up. And I was able to do well enough to not let him down, because it was his reputation. And it was a real turning point for me. That was about 5 years ago.
It's interesting because you mentioned that you didn't want to let your friend down. Maybe if the situation wasn't as such, if your friend wasn't in the picture, maybe you would have found all this experience too intimidating, and maybe you would have backed away from this, and you wouldn't have tried it.
Well, as I say, Yulia, I don't move in those circles normally anyway, so I probably wouldn't have come across them. They probably wouldn't have come across me. Sometimes when you have an introduction from someone like that, it gives you step up the ladder a few notches, and you'd have to work your way very, very slowly otherwise, on your own without any external input. But that was like snakes and ladders. I moved up the ladder quite quickly because I was near the bottom at the beginning.
Yes, it's very interesting that you were able to do this. You were able to outperform your beliefs, because you were somewhere at a certain level in your head.
Yeah.
And here came this friend of yours that said, okay, I have this opportunity for you, and you can be there, from here you can be there. And you said, okay, challenge accepted. And this means,
but there's a very interesting relationship, I think, between the belief and the success. So yes, you can will it to happen, you can believe it's going to happen, but you've got to have some external confirmation that you deserve this and you're good enough. And that confirmation might be a referral like that, or it might be just approval of a very big organization who work at a high level of competence and expectation from trainers and consultants. If they say you've done a good job, Andrew, then the belief is boosted.
yes,
but it's difficult to sustain the belief and the will if the success isn't coming. So you need the break. The break's got to happen.
Yes, but it's interesting because, yes, I agree with you. At times you need to hold on to something. You need to borrow confidence from somewhere, because maybe it's not all in you. And this is why this is a great example that, yes, you were able to borrow confidence. You were able to step up your game, to outperform and get that get to that success. I want to lead you now a slightly different path, so bear with me a little. I was thinking just the other day, when you look at children, you see that they struggle between being free and authentic and doing exactly what they want, and having the love and the appreciation of their parents. And these things don't exactly, coincide and coexist. So from a young age, children focus on their parents' responses and gestures as a result of their actions, and they eventually alter their behavior in order to receive their parents' affection and approval and the attachment. And I see this in somehow in coaching and in public speaking. Well, not only in these fields, but we are mainly focusing on these fields in our conversation right now. So I see that coaches and public speakers tend to lose their authenticity in favor of pleasing the audience, in order to just promote or just to sell their services. How do you balance these concepts? I mean, still be authentic in your delivery, in the way you present, and still give the audience what they need without compromising on your authenticity. How can you balance this? How do you think that this can be done?
Again, really interesting question that I don't think I've ever had to, I've never compromised on my beliefs and values since I started doing this, 12 years ago. But what I have changed is the way I frame the message. So I'll frame the message in a way that is likely to work for the audience that I've got. So I don't have to compromise anything, really. It just means that I'll use different examples or I'll explain things in slightly different ways. But the beliefs underpinning everything that I talk about, everything that I write about, everything that I coach are unchanged. I think they've been very consistent over the last 12 years of doing this since that reinvention. I think I've got better at it. I think I've got, it's the messaging is crisper. It's more likely to resonate with the audience that I've got. But to be honest, the message that I'm trying to put out into the business world really is one of humanization, of a more soulful, human, heart-based kind of leadership, which is expressed through communicating in that sort of storyfied way. So I think that because audiences, generally speaking, are interested in this, because this has been the way the tide has been turning in recent years, I don't really have to push my message very hard on the audience because they already want it. So they either already want it or it's just not relevant. They haven't even thought about it. So I haven't really had to compromise very much at all in terms of seeking approval, but I've certainly had to frame the message in a way that's likely to sit well with either that audience or that audience or that audience.
But I asked you this question because, as you mentioned, you also, you were also at the beginning of this journey. You found yourself at the beginning at some point. And there are many people right now that are at the beginning of their journey in these fields, in coaching, in public speaking. And somehow I see them, as sending textbook messages, and not putting their message into it. They are simply, I don't know, quoting other famous people. And this is why I asked you, what advice would you give them, in order to be able to balance their persona, their personality, and put their personality in the message, but also give the audience what they want, because many of them, I think, are doing this job because they see it as a high-paying job. Probably, getting to a high-paying job.
Sometimes it is.
Sometimes, but I know that at the moment in Romania, there are many people that are going towards, in this direction, because they think that personal development is the place to be right now. So they are trying, their very best to be able to enter this market and be able to somehow deliver something to the audience. And as I said, many times they are just quoting famous people that have written dozens of books and gave TED Talks and whatever, without being authentic in their delivery. And they're just doing this because they think, okay, people want a program on, I don't know, how to shape their personal story, or people want a program teaching them how to, speak in public. And this is all they're doing. And they extract a need from the audience, and they are simply, putting in some, as I said before, textbook messages, and that's it. So,
Yeah.
what advice would you have for these people that are at the beginning of their journey, and they are trying to be authentic, and they are trying to also give the audience what they need?
I can only really speak from my own experience, Yulia, because I guess everybody will approach this in their own way. So when I lived at Bob's house and he had that library of books, and I started reading them, obviously certain authors resonated with me. So Seth Godin, Brené Brown, Ken Robinson, Malcolm Gladwell, all these people that I loved what they were talking about. But you can't just copy everything they do and sort of pass it off as your own idea. So I think you can be influenced by things, and you've got to use those things to shape your own ideas and your own theories and your own models and templates. So when I look back, those authors and speakers were very, very influential on me. They made a huge impact on me. And in fact, I just came across I did a YouTube clip a few years ago talking about who my leadership influences were. And one of them was Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani girl who was shot in the head by the Taliban. She was one of my influences, along with those authors I've just mentioned. But you've got to synthesize the best stuff that you see and then find your own voice and your own model and your own angle. So I made up a lot of stuff, so I talk about verbal PR. That's what I think I do. And I've never heard that term before. I looked it up on Google the other day and nothing came up. Verbal PR. So right, I'll have that one. I called myself the multi-story man, because multi-story car park, well, story has an E in it, and story doesn't have an E in it in our sense. So I'll call myself the multi-story man. I've never heard anybody else say that before. This idea of having 3 ins to judge how well you're communicating. So you have information on the surface level, you have insight, much better, 1 layer down, and then you have inspiration, 3rd, better still. So you have sort of okay, better, best, with those 3 in words: information, insight, and inspiration. I've not seen that anywhere before. That was my own idea. So you start to build up your own material after a while, even though you've been influenced by some of that other stuff. So I'm very thoughtful. I'm quite analytical. I look at things, I listen to things, I learn all the time by listening and reading and watching. And then I incorporate some of that stuff into my own work, but in my own way. So if you take Simon Sinek's Start With Why thing, for example, I think that there's a cliche that's been put about over the last few years, that you should follow your passion. But a lot of people don't know what it is.
Actually, this was my last question for you. But if you want to answer right now, okay. And you also went a step further, because I wanted to ask you about the 3 ins, and you already went there.
Oh, well, I'm anticipating. We're obviously on the right wavelength.
Yeah.
So the thing with the passion is that I think that often you don't know what it is. So how do I know which direction to go? Because I'm not sure what it is yet. So I was listening to a podcast a few months ago, and this lady was saying that she doesn't think it's a case of following your passion. She thinks it's a case of trying things that interest you, and then settling into something and getting better at it through practice, and then getting some success, and then getting better and getting more success. And then the passion emerges. It's not at the beginning. It comes through repetition and through practice and improvement and getting successful. And her particular change of direction was, very oddly, she became a professional poker player. How about that? I think she had some administrative role or something before. She had nothing to do with poker before, but she found that she had a gift for playing poker that she never knew. So the passion for poker wasn't there at the beginning because she'd never tried it before. So I think that start with why thing is an interesting idea, but I kind of took it, on and took it in my own direction and started to talk to people about, well, what drives you, what motivates you, how did you find your mojo? Are you still looking for it? And then weaving my own experience into it. So in a way, I've now personalized Simon Sinek's original idea to me. But obviously I'll reference him because that started that train of thought, 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is, okay, you don't need to reinvent the wheel because it was already invented and people already, spoke and had ample talks on certain subjects, so you can read them, you can watch them, but you need to filter everything through your own voice, through your own experience. And of course, it helps if you have a certain experience in that, particular area that you are trying to, talk about. Or, I mean, people, it's funny because people go into personal development, but they they don't have personal knowledge of themselves first.
Yeah.
So they're trying to help other people develop and shape their beliefs and the way they look at things, but they haven't done this for themselves.
Yes.
So yes,
that's right. How can you coach me if you haven't sorted yourself out?
Yeah, this is why many coaches have their own coaches, because you need to be able to deliver to your client.
But I think you're right. You use the expression your own experiences, and I think that's so important. That the thing that's, this expression, the USP, the unique selling point, USP.
Yep.
Well, it's a bit of a cliche in the business world, and again, a lot of the time, the unique bit of their USP isn't unique at all. They'll say we're very client focused, or we give excellent value for money. Well, that's not a USP. Everybody says that. So if you replace the letter U with the word YOU and then SP, you've got to put more of you into it, because there's only one IULIA in the world. There's only one of you that's had your experiences. There's only one of you who's filtered all of that knowledge that you're accumulating and, framing it in your own unique way. So the more you can talk about that, the more by definition you are unique. Not by copying what other people are saying, but by making your own version of it.
Yes, and exactly. And also, yes, remembering to reference them, to say, okay, this is who influenced me, this is what I read that influenced me, because don't pass it on as if it were yours, as if it were your work, because gosh, Andrew, I could talk to you for hours for hours on end. I would have one last question for you. How do you help people shape their business stories?
Well, do you mean in a practical sense? How do I deliver the work, or do you mean what's my approach to doing it?
What is your approach to doing it? Yes. What exactly do you think is important? What their what their story needs to look like to be okay to. Yeah.
In the most basic sense, there's a little acronym called PAL, which is pain, aspirin, and legacy. So most products and services in the world are designed to solve a pain or a problem of some kind. That's the aspirin. And then the legacy is the outcome that the client can expect afterwards, after having swallowed the aspirin or taken the vaccine. So in a very, very basic sense, they've got to be able to explain those three things, but in a way that's not mechanical, that's quite sort of conversational, and maybe not even in that order either. And I'm often embarrassed at the simplicity of that as a model when I talk to clients, but they often say afterwards, "Oh, I really like that PAL thing you mentioned." I thought, well, no, that's a bit basic though. There was lots of other stuff. And they said, "No, we really like that." And I think it's problematic for them because often they're very familiar with the aspirin, because that's the product, the service, that's the thing they're close to. But the pain and the legacy is more in the client's world. And it's harder for them to get into the client's world and talk about the client's world than it is their own world. So we start really with the basic, what's the problem you solve? What is it that you do to fix it? And what happens afterwards? What's the outcome that you're generating? And there's a simple sort of surface level version of those three things. And there's also the insightful bit, almost like the less obvious column, which is where the really interesting stuff is, as opposed to the blindingly obvious stuff. So we usually start with that's the beginning. And then we develop a whole, we build their library of stories, of anecdotes and case studies and models and metaphors to help illustrate the basic core story of this is what we do, this is the problem we fix, this is what we do, this is the outcome. So you've got to have different layers of the story, because otherwise it's too simplistic, and then you'll get fed up of telling the same thing over and over again otherwise.
And of course, you want the message to be as clear as possible, and you want to, take your audience on this journey with you when you are telling them your business story, because it's important for them to be incorporated in that business story.
So you can say it very clearly, but it will be really boring and dry if you say it in a very mechanical way. And then if you make it very flowery and use lots of poetic language and metaphors, they won't have a clue what you do because there's no clarity. So you kind of got to find a balance between it being creative and really unusual, but also clear.
Yes, you don't want it to be vague, because no.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew, again. I will leave our audience with a final personal note. Get to where you want to be, one story at a time. Thank you very much, Andrew. It was a pleasure.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the emails so you can be notified when the next videos are uploaded. You can find all the necessary details in the description below.